His arm passed over her head. She rose up, driving her elbow into his floating ribs. The sound was a sickening, wet crack that echoed into the ballroom. Chen-gu choked. The air forced from his lungs. The pain was blinding, a starburst of agony that made the glittering chandeliers swim in his vision. He was a strategist, a man who saw the world as pawns. But he was playing against Simone Grader, whose game he didn't even understand. He tried to create distance, but she gave him no room. She was on him, a whirlwind of precise strikes, a heel kick and back-to-back jabs. Every move was calculated. Every strike had a purpose. She wasn't trying to knock him out. She was taking him apart piece by piece. She was showing him and the entire silent, watching room. The cinematic slow motion moment came when he made his final desperate move. He lunged, trying to use his weight to overpower her, but caught Sandra his outstretched sidestepped arm and used his it against him. She twisted and threw him. He landed hard on the marble floor, the impact jarring his teeth. Before he could even process the fall, she was on him, not with a fist, but with her fingers pressed firmly against his throat. She leaned down, her face inches from his, her expression still, unnervingly calm. The spotlight from the ceiling isolated them, a tableau of absolute shocking dominance. The lesson, she whispered, her voice a cold, low counterpoint to the fire in her eyes, is to never mistake a servant for a slave. Her gaze swept over the stunned faces in the crowd, then returned to the man, gasping for air beneath her. And my name is Sandra. She removed her fingers from his throat, stood up, and brushed a non-existent piece of dust from her black pants. She walked out of the ballroom and without a backward glance at the Mafia boss or the dumbstruck looks. The silence she left in her wake was more profound than any applause. Do-jun rushed to his boss's side, but Chen-gu waved him off, his eyes still fixed on the doorway through which she had disappeared. He had not just been beaten, he had been redefined. Chen-gu stood in the sterile white light of his private medical suite, a doctor resetting his dislocated shoulder with a grunt and a sickening pop. The physical pain was a dull, distant ache compared to the roaring furnace of his humiliation. In his entire life, no one had ever laid a hand on him, let alone systematically dismantled him in front of the city's most influential people. He hadn't just lost a fight, he had lost his aura of invincibility. He looked at his reflection in a polished chrome instrument tray, a man with a bruised face, a useless arm in a sling, and eyes that burned with a terrifying newfound curiosity. Find her, he commanded, his voice a low growl. Do-jun, standing rigidly by the door, nodded. We have her employment records. Sandra Akin, no listed address, paid in cash. That's not what I mean. Chen-gu snapped, his patience worn thin. Want to know who the hotel thinks she is. I want to know who she is. I want to know where a waitress learns to fight like that. I want to know every place she slept, every meal she's eaten, every breath she's taken for the past 9 years. Use Matrix full resources. I want the file on my desk by morning. Matrix was their ghost in the machine, a legendary hacker who could pull secrets from the darkest corners of the digital world. For the rest of the night, servers hummed and algorithms churned as Matrix hunted for the digital footprint of Sandra Akin. The initial results were frustratingly sparse. A ghost, just as Do-jun had said, but Matrix was relentless. He cross-referenced facial recognition databases, international travel manifests, and encrypted communications from the underworld. And then he found it, a single grainy video from a dark web stream dated 2 years prior. The file landed in Chen-gu's secure inbox at 2 a.m., and he opened it, his good hand clenching into a fist. The video showed a brutal, unsanctioned cage fight in what looked like a derelict warehouse in Greece. In the cage was a younger, rawer version of Sandra, her hair all frizzy, her face a mask of ferocious concentration. The announcer's voice, thick with a Greece accent, boomed over the roar of the crowd. And in this corner, the undefeated phantom, the ghost Sandra Akin. The file contained her face, a mask of ferocious concentration. The file contained more articles from defunct fighting forums, whispers of a prodigy trained by a legendary but disgraced coach known only as Gyms. She had blazed a trail through the Roman underground circuit, a phantom who appeared one and vanished. Her style was a unique terrifying blend of technical boxing and something else, something viciously efficient. Then came the final fight. Her opponent was a mountain of a man, Drago the Butcher. The fight was a massacre. The file included stills of Drago breaking her arm, shattering her face. It detailed how he had targeted her mentor Jim's after the match, crippling him as a final cruel statement. And then Sandra, the ghost, had vanished completely until she reappeared in his city, serving champagne at a gala. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a legend in hiding. She wasn't running from a fight. She was running from a war she had already lost. The humiliation Chen-gu felt began to curdle into something else entirely. A deep, chilling respect. He hadn't been beaten by a servant. He had been disciplined by a survivor. The address Matrix had finally unearthed was for a tenement building in a part of the dead city. Peeling paint, the smell of damp concrete, and the distant wail of a siren. It was a world away from the Nakamushi world. Chen-gu, his arm in a sleek black sling that did little to hide his injury, stood before apartment 109. He knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. The door opened a few inches, held by a chain. Sandra's eyes, weary and cold, peered out at him. She was in a simple gray tank top and sweatpants, her hair bound tight. Seeing him, her expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear, only a weary resignation. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat. "We need to talk," he said simply. She studied him for a long moment, then unlatched the chain and opened the door. Her apartment was sparse, almost monastic. An empty room, no bed, just a bag and a boxing bag. He stepped inside, the space feeling impossibly small with his presence. He held up a tablet, the screen showing the file Matrix had compiled. Her face, the video, the articles, her entire hidden life laid bare. Sandra, the ghost, he said, the name sounding foreign and powerful in the small room. Impressive resume. She didn't look at the tablet. Her eyes stayed locked on his. "You dug deep." "It's what I do," he replied. He gestured with his good hand around the room. "This is what you choose. Hiding. Pouring wine for men like me." It was quiet, she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. "Until you got bored." A tense silence stretched between them. It was a standoff, a reassessment of power. He was no longer the arrogant mafia boss, and she was no longer the invisible waitress. They were two cats circling each other in a cage of her own making. "I am not here for revenge," Chen-gu said, his voice softer now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "I am here to make you an offer." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "What you did to me in that ballroom, it was a masterclass in control, strategy, and execution. That is a skill set I value far more than brute force. I want you to work for me, not as an enforcer, as a trainer. My elite guard are strong, but they are undisciplined. You would make them weapons." Sandra almost laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "You want me to train the dogs of the man I just beat in front of the entire city? I want to hire the artist who created the masterpiece I experienced." He corrected her. The air between them crackled with an unspoken energy. It was more than just respect. It was a dangerous magnetic pull, a recognition of like minds of shared darkness. "I'm retired," she said, turning away from him to look at the heavy bag. "I don't fight anymore." "You were fighting last night," he countered, "and you train every day. You're not retired. You're dormant." Hiding from him, from Drago. The name hung in the air like poison. He saw her shoulders tense, a flicker of raw pain crossing her face. Before being suppressed, he had hit the nerve. "My offer stands," he said, placing the tablet on her small table. "My number is on there. When you get tired of hiding, call me." He turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the quiet room with the ghosts he had just dragged back into the light. For a week, Sandra lived in a state of suspended animation. She didn't go to work. The catering company had, unsurprisingly, terminated her employment with a frightened phone call. She just existed within the four walls of her apartment. The heavy bag, her only companion. She didn't want Chen-gu world. She had escaped. A world just like it. A world of blood and money and men who saw people as pawns. She had chosen anonymity for a reason. Jim's. After Drago had destroyed her, he had gone after the old man who had found her on the streets and taught her how to channel her rage into an art form. He hadn't killed him. He had done something worse. He had broken his legs, ensuring the old boxer would never stand on his own again. Sandra had used every last penny she had earned in the ring to set him up in a quiet private care facility, paying the exorbitant bills by working menial jobs under the radar. Her invisibility was his shield. Accepting Chen Gu's offer would mean stepping back into the light, and the light cast a very long, very dark shadow. On the fourth day, her phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered it. The voice on the other end was frail, laced with a familiar terror. Sandra, they came for me. It was Jim's. Her blood ran cold. What? Who are you? Hurt? No, no, he stammered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They didn't touch me. They were Roman big men. They just stood in my room. Said their boss was in town and sends his regards. Said he heard a ghost. Was seen at a fancy party. Sandra, he knows. He knows you're here. The line went dead. She knew it wasn't a direct threat. It was a massage, a chess move from a monster who enjoyed the game. Drago was here. Her past had not just found her. It was actively hunting her. The quiet life was over. The rage she had kept banked for 6 years roared back to life. She walked round her room, pulled out her phone, and dialed the number Chen Gu had left her. He answered on the first ring. I'm in, she said, her voice hard as forged steel. But we do this on my terms. I don't work for you. I work with you. And when we find Drago, he's mine. The alliance was forged in the cold, minimalist expanse of Chen Gu's penthouse office. The city glittered below them, a tapestry of a million lives he controlled, and she had tried to hide among. There was no contract, only a meeting of eyes and a shared understanding. He needed her mind. She needed his resources. It was a perfect deadly symbiosis. Her first order of business was his security team. She met them in a state-of-the-art training facility hidden beneath one of his corporate towers. They were big, loyal, and utterly complacent, used to winning through numbers and reputation. Sandra saw them as raw, undisciplined clay. Your boss pays you to protect him, she announced, her voice echoing in the vast, matted space. But you couldn't protect him from an unarmed waitress. Today, your education begins. What followed was a week of brutal, ego-shattering training. She rammed them until they collapsed. She taught them that strength was useless without technique, that aggression was a weakness without control. She broke down their stances, corrected their
You
footwork,
think you take
and
me?
sparred with
I know
each
I
of them,
can.
exploiting their
Show
flaws
me.
with surgical precision. She didn't just teach them how to fight. She taught them how to see, how to anticipate, how to think 3 moves ahead. Do Jun, initially skeptical, became her most dedicated student. His respect for her growing with every bruise. During this time, the dynamic between Sandra and Chen Gu shifted. He would watch her train his men, his expression unreadable. He saw the teacher, the strategist, the warrior. After the sessions, they would convene in his office, poring over matrix intelligence, reports on Drago's operations. They learned that Drago was in town to broker a massive arms deal using an unsanctioned high-stakes fighting tournament as a cover and a display of his dominance. The winner of the tournament would be granted a private audience where the real business would be conducted. He's arrogant, Sandra noted, tracing the connections on a digital map. He loves the theater of it all. He thinks he's untouchable. He's about to receive a surprise. Chen Gu said, his eyes on her. The romantic tension that had sparked in her apartment had not dissipated. It had deepened, a low hum beneath the surface of their strategic planning. It was a dangerous attraction between two people who understood the violence and control that governed their worlds. He saw the vulnerability she tried so desperately to hide, the pain for her mentor that drove her. She saw the man behind the carefully constructed facade of the Mafia boss, a brilliant, lonely strategist who had never met his equal. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he found her alone in the gym, relentlessly working the heavy bag. Sweat glistened on her skin, each impact a sharp, percussive crack. He didn't speak, just handed her a bottle of water. You're going to burn yourself out, he said quietly. She stopped, breathing heavily, and took the water. He's the final fighter, she said, her voice tight. The champion's match. I have to go through everyone to get to him. You don't have to do it alone, Chen-gu replied, his gaze intense. This is my fight, too. Now she looked at him, then truly looked at him, and saw not a crime lord, but an ally. The lines were blurring. The tournament is in 2 days, she said. Let's go hunting. The tournament was held in a place where the city went to die, a cavernous abandoned shipyard warehouse on the industrial waterfront, its steel girders weeping rust, its vast broken windows staring out at the black oily water like vacant eyes. Inside, a makeshift ring had been erected under a cluster of harsh industrial lights surrounded by a roaring, bloodthirsty crowd of criminals, arms dealers, and underworld spectators. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, stale beer, and avarice. This was Drago's church, and violence was the sermon. Chen-gu and his men now, moving with a newfound discipline, secured a vantage point in the high gantries, a shadow army watching over the proceedings. Matrix was patched in, feeding them real-time intel. But down below, in the chaos, Sandra was alone. She was no longer the waitress or the trainer, dressed in simple black shorts and a sports top, her hands wrapped. She was the ghost again. Her path to Drago was a bloody one. Her first opponent was a hulking brawler who relied on brute strength. Sandra dismantled him in under a minute, a flurry of precise strikes to his joints, leaving him writhing on the canvas. The crowd, initially cheering for the brawler, fell into a stunned, appreciative silence. Her second opponent was a weary capoeira fighter, all fluid motion and flashy kicks. Sandra never let him find his rhythm. She closed the distance, turning his dance into a clumsy, painful grapple, ending it with a chokehold that put him to sleep. She moved through the bracket like a phantom, each fight a brutal, efficient statement. She wasn't there to entertain. She was there to conquer. Finally, the moment came. The announcer, the same man from the Grease video, grabbed the microphone. And now for the final match for the grand prize, our reigning champion, the master of pain, Drago the Butcher. The crowd erupted as Drago entered the ring. He was even bigger than she remembered, a monument of scarred muscle and cruel intentions. He saw her across the ring and smiled, a predator's grin that promised a world of suffering. He raised the microphone to his lips. Look what we have here, he boomed, his voice dripping with sadistic glee. The little ghost has come back from the dead. Did you miss me? I heard you put on quite a show for the local talent. He gestured dismissively towards the gantries where Chen-gu watched. Tell me, did you enjoy our last dance? I sent your old man a souvenir. I hope he likes the wheelchair. Sandra's face remained a stone mask, but inside a cold, white-hot fury ignited. The bell rang. Drago charged a freight train of muscle, expecting to overwhelm her as he had before. But this was not the same girl from 6 years ago. Drago met his charge not with force, but with intelligence. She was weaving and ducking, letting him punch himself out. The fight was a brutal ballet, his raw power against her technical brilliance. He landed a heavy body blow that made her gasp, the memory of broken ribs flaring. She answered with a razor-sharp, 3-punch combination that split his eyebrow open, blood trickling into his eye. This was more than a fight. It was a conversation spoken in bruises and blood, a continuation of a story that had almost ended her. The middle rounds were a blur of pain and strategy. Drago was a sadist. He wasn't just trying to win, he was trying to inflict maximum damage to break her spirit before he broke her body. He caught her with a spinning back fist that sent her staggering into the ropes. The crowd roaring, sensing the kill. He followed up, pinning her there, raining down heavy, clubbing blows. From his vantage point, Chen-gu clenched his fists, his knuckles white. Do-jun looked at him, ready to give the order for their men to intervene. But Chen-gu shook his head. This was her fight, her revenge. Pinned against the ropes, taking a punishing barrage of blows. Sandra wasn't panicking. She was analyzing. She was weathering the storm, protecting her head, letting his punches slam into her arms and shoulders. She remembered what gyms had always told her. Every fighter has a rhythm, a pattern hidden in their rage. Find it and you can pull the strings. Or, overconfident, got sloppy. He threw a wild right hook, leaving himself open. For a fraction of a second, it was all Sandra needed. She exploded off the ropes, driving the crown of her head up under his chin. His teeth clicked together with an audible crack, and his eyes glazed over. She didn't let up. She unleashed a furious, desperate combination, every ounce of her pain and rage from the last 6 years fueling her fists. An uppercut snapped his head back. She was no longer just a technician. She was a storm. The momentum had shifted. The crowd felt it, their cheers becoming a chaotic roar. Drago was hurt, confused. The ghost he thought he had buried was tearing him apart. He lunged, a desperate, clumsy tackle. It was the same mistake he'd made in their first fight, the one that had led to her downfall. But she had spent 6 years replaying that moment in her mind. This time she was ready. As he came in low, she dropped her weight and drove her knees straight into his face. There was a sickening crunch of breaking bone or collapse to the canvas. His nose a ruined mess, blood pouring onto the mat. He tried to push himself up, but his body wouldn't obey. Sandra stood over him, her chest heaving, her own face bruised and swollen, but her eyes were clear and victorious. The crowd was screaming for her to finish him, a primal chant for blood. Chengu watched, his heart pounding. This was the moment of truth, the moral precipice. She raised her foot, poised to stomp down on his head, to end him for what he did to her, for what he did to Jims. Drago looked up at her through a haze of pain and blood, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes for the first time. She held the position for a long, eternal second, the entire warehouse holding its breath. Then slowly she lowered her foot. She looked down at the broken man, then at her own trembling hands, and she saw the monster she was about to become, and she chose not to.